Hi everybody, Chapter 8, Lesson 3. What we're looking at here, again, of course, in Chapter 8 is this time period known as the Roaring Twenties, the Jazz Age. And we've been looking at 1920 to 1929, and we've been focusing on how our cultural identity as a people, what it means to be an American, how has that changed over time. And we're going to continue our discussion about that today. And what we're going to look at here are some of the things going on in the mind of the average American, in the life of the average American in the 1920s. And we're going to start with something that we've seen a little bit of recently here in America still today. And we're going to look at something called nativism. And this issue of nativism is based off the fact that in the 1920s things are really crazy. Remember, we've had the high unemployment, the rising inflation, the high cost of living, low wages, fear of communism. All of these things that we saw going on led to a belief in something called, and we're going to use this term again and again and again, so it's probably worth circling it in your notes, nativism. It's this idea that immigrants are coming to our country and we need to protect America from these immigrants because they're changing our country in ways that we don't like. An example of this would be all of these problems we have in the late 19-teens, early 1920s, getting blamed on, in this case, new European immigrants. So we say, well, whose fault is the inflation and the rising prices? Immigrants from Eastern and Southern European. Whose fault is it the Red Scare? Immigrants from Russia. Whose fault is it that we have no jobs? Immigrants coming to take our jobs. And this fear, this anger, is going to express itself in lots of different ways. Let's give you an example. There were two immigrants from Italy, a guy named Nicola Sacco and Bartolomeo Vanzetti. These guys were wanted. They were arrested up in New England, in Boston, for robbery and murder. And lots of people thought they were guilty right off the bat, in part because they were immigrants. Others said, you know what, just because they're immigrants doesn't mean that they're guilty. Some people felt that Sacco and Vanzetti would never get a fair trial. Some people said, of course they'll get a fair trial. What ends up happening is Sacco and Vanzetti face a lot of hatred. They end up being convicted. And people to this day wonder if whether or not Sacco and Vanzetti were convicted based on their ethnic origin and beliefs. Were they convicted because they were Italian? Were they convicted because they were from someplace else, because they didn't believe the same thing everyone else believed? Vanzetti himself, Bartolomeo Vanzetti, he says fear of foreigners was one of the reasons why he was convicted of murder. He said there was a hysteria and resentment against immigrants, so of course he and Sacco were going to be convicted of murder. So this kind of thing is what we're looking at, right? And you can compare it to those kinds of things that we're struggling with right now on our own country with immigration. So this nativism that's out there, this hatred of immigrants, is going to see itself impact America and the average person by our government, or through our government, passing new laws. Those laws are designed to stop immigrants, right? Donald Trump in 2016, he wants to stop immigrants by building a wall. Stop immigrants coming to America from Mexico, from Central America, build a wall. In the 1920s, people wanted to stop immigrants by passing laws. One of these laws, the Emergency Quota Act, just circled it right there underneath my head, says that we will let you come to America, but depending on where you're from, national origin, and your race or ethnic identity, are you Italian, Polish, Jewish, German? Those things will determine whether or not you get to come into our country. So, essentially, we only let in a small percent, 3%, of the total number of people already here from your country. So we said, for example, all right, we have 100 people in America already from Germany. We're only going to let in 3% of that total number of new Germans. So next year, we'll let in, well, 3% of 100 is 3. So we'll let in 3 Germans. That's it. So the new number of Germans in America will be 103. Now, if there were already 1,000 English people in America, then we would let in 30 more English people, and so on, because we let in 3% of who's already here. So that's the first time in American history that we really ever actually put a limit, a quota on immigration. We passed another law just a year later, National Origins Act 1924, that made these things permanent. It was no longer just an emergency, it was permanent. But because we've restricted the number of people coming to America, we still need cheap labor. So we need people to work our farms, in our mines, on our railroads. And where are those people going to come from? Ironically, it's the people that we no longer want in our country, at least according to those who want to build a wall, Mexico. So America has had this kind of complex hatred of the immigrant for a long, long time. And that hatred expresses itself in laws, emergency quota, and National Origins Act, but it also expresses itself in society. And we're going to do more work with this, I think, in class, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it here, but groups like the Ku Klux Klan will rise up again, but not just targeting African Americans. Now, we're targeting immigrants, Catholics, Jews, African Americans, of course, but anyone else that the Klan views as un-American, in air quotes. This idea was so popular that the Klan becomes a nationwide institution. They even run a person for president in the early 1900s. That's how powerful and how popular the Ku Klux Klan is in the 1920s. It's pretty crazy. So we have, at least for one part of Americans' life there, a real kind of distaste for nativism, or for immigrants rather, expressed as nativism. What about for the rest of us? What about for how we view the rest of our lives? Well, in the 1920s, people really had an incredibly high value on personal freedom, and we called it the new morality. This idea that we should be free to choose what we want to do, that you and I should be free to make our own choices. An example of this would be a woman, and she wasn't typical of the 1920s woman. She wasn't a woman that, every woman wasn't one of these, but she was a representative of this kind of personal freedom movement. We call her the flapper. And the flapper is a representative of this personal freedom because of the things that she does. A woman was supposed to go and get married respectably, be a mom. Not the flapper, she's going to want to go to college and get away from her parents. Okay, well, she should dress conservatively. A woman should, in the 1920s, look the way women have always looked. Not the flapper. Shorten her hair, wear kinds of risque clothing that women traditionally don't wear. Well, her behavior should be modest then. If she's not going to dress modest, she should behave modest. No. Nope, I'm going to be out late in my short dress, smoking, drinking, sex. I'm going to use birth control, all kinds of things here that are controversial for women that you wouldn't see a person do before the 1920s happens in the 1920s because of this value on personal freedom. Now, not everyone's going to like that, obviously, right? Lots of people are going to react to this new way of living, and they're going to be upset about it. They're going to say, well, this isn't America. This isn't how America should operate, right? So lots of people say American values are being lost. We're losing our values. It's not American anymore. Well, if we're not American anymore, then what do we rely on? Well, a lot of people in the 1920s who feared this traditional loss of values decided to embrace religion, and they fought back with something called fundamentalists. Now, here's the trick. You can have a fundamentalist in any religion. A fundamentalist typically believes that the holy book of that religion, in Christianity, people who follow Christ, the holy book is the Bible. Fundamentalists often believe that the Bible is 100% true as written. The Bible says God made the earth in 7 days. It took 7 days, 7 24-hour days to make the earth. Boom, that's it. That's the fundamentalist perspective, right? It's literally true. So a lot of fundamentalists will say this view is the way to fight back against that new morality that's up over there with those crazy flapper women. Being fundamentalist, we can believe in things that we have as tradition, the way things used to be. I'll give you an example. For the longest time, people believed in creationism, that some sort of higher being, Christian God, Muslim Allah, Hindu, Brahmin, whatever, creates the world. Evolution obviously says that's not the case, that we evolved over time from more primitive organisms. Well, this was illegal to teach in a lot of different states where fundamentalism was at play. So groups like the American Civil Liberties Union, the ACLU, went looking to break this law, finding teachers that would be willing to get arrested because they want to challenge this idea. One guy, John Scopes, says, okay, I'll do it. I'll move to Tennessee. I'll teach evolution where it's illegal because a lot of people there believe in fundamentalism. He gets arrested, goes on trial. It's called the Scopes trial, and it tests that law. And even though Scopes is found guilty, what it does do is show that a lot of people were really, really over-invested in this law, in fundamentalism. I'll give you another example of how people in the 1920s were really kind of expressing themselves, and that's alcohol. For the longest time, alcohol was really tearing apart American society, and I can't even begin to express how prevalent booze was. The average 15-year-old by 1900 was drinking bottles of whiskey a week, okay? So Americans began to really say that we need to change our society by having prohibition. We need to ban alcohol if we want to have a better society, because too many people are embracing this new morality. We need to get rid of the alcohol. So we see something passed. We see the 18th Amendment passed. 18th Amendment says, nope, no more alcohol. And it says the federal government and state governments are going to get a ton of police powers to fight alcohol. And look how many people are arrested back in 1920. 500,000 Americans are not going to quit drinking. Now, look, lots of people think that if we did this, if we support this, then prohibition will reduce unemployment and domestic violence and poverty. Other Americans will completely and utterly ignore the law. They'll say, you know what, this is ridiculous. We're going to go to bars like speakeasies. We're going to purchase booze anyway. We're going to supply those speakeasies and alcohols with bootlegging, where we smuggle alcohol in. Yeah, all of these things, for 10 years, tear at American society, 1920 to 1929. Eventually, for example, the 21st Amendment will repeal prohibition, 21 to drink, 21st Amendment, right, repeals prohibition, and allows alcohol in America again. But it just shows you how upset and how tense people were over the changes happening to American society. And we'll deal more with that in class.